And welcome back, everybody, to another deck profile. And this time we're going back to Branded Despia or Branded Bestial, depending on your persuasion. But before that, I of course wanted to show off a couple of things. And one of those things is actually this deck box from Amanda LaPalm that just came out. And this was a thing that I have pre-ordered all the way back in November of 2022. So it's just very exciting to see it finally arrive, because it feels like my setup is finally complete. And with that said, I just kind of wanted to go straight into the deck profile itself, but I did want to specify that I haven't really changed that many things in this deck. I brought the card count back down to 40, so that's one thing that has changed, and the side deck changed ever so slightly, but the extra deck is still pretty much exactly the same. But I figured that it was still an important enough update to still bring it up, so let's get right into it. Let me unpack this. And now that everything is finally unpacked, let's go ahead and get straight into the deck profile. Now, like usual, we're going to start off with the main deck. So I'm going to push these out of the way so that we can start talking about the most important thing at the moment. Now, first things first, let's begin with what I would say is one of the most important cards in the deck, and that's going to be Guiding Quem, the Virtuous. So now this card has become a very important one, I would say, which is why I run it at 2. Now, full disclaimer here, just like before, I'm not running Ad Libitum. I'm not running Tragedy either, because I find them to be just other pieces that you would have to go out of your way to extend into or to extend from. But I find that Guiding Quem is already very good on her own because of everything that she can accomplish. Because as soon as you normal summon her or special summon her, you do get the effect to dump either one Fallen of Albaz or one card that just mentions it. So you could go ahead and dump pretty much any branded card that ends up mentioning it if need be. So you could actually go ahead and dump a Branded Fusion if you need it. So this is another way of searching for Branded Fusion, and then you could banish your Retribution to get that Branded Fusion into your hand if you don't have a Looper or anything like that. So this is still another fantastic way of searching for cards like that. So that's why I like running 2, because I find that there are multiple purposes or multiple uses for Guiding Quem. And the same is going to go pretty much for Blazing Cartesia as well. Blazing Cartesia has been such a good card because of her effect to fuse very quickly. Now, the tuner aspect of her doesn't really come up very often, unfortunately, as it used to with this deck, but I have still kept the ratios pretty much the same because her fusing effect is really what you want, and the ability to be able to bring her back to hand whenever you send, at the end of the turn that you have sent a card from the extra deck, I believe, into the graveyard, you could go ahead and add her back to your hand at the end phase, which is really good. So you could recur her as a resource fairly often, but you will never need more than 2. 2 is definitely the limit for this card. Next, we've got triple Fallen of Albaz. I believe in just running 3. I don't believe in running any less than that, because I believe Fallen of Albaz is just a resource that you should be able to recur infinitely. So if you're just running 2, then you do run, unfortunately, into a case where you could very much get stuck, because you have 3 Branded Fusion and only 2 Fallen of Albaz. Now, you could still recycle Fallen of Albaz in several ways, but it's not always feasible. You want to make sure that you always have an Albaz to work with in your deck, no matter what. So I don't believe in running 2. I think 3 is the way to go. Then next we have a Looper, the Jester of Despia. This is going to be the main searcher of the deck for your branded spells and traps, specifically spells. And more specifically, I want to say when it comes to Branded Fusion, of course. These are the only 2 Despia monsters that I run in this deck. I do not need more than that. I find the other ones to just be probably closer to bricks, if anything, most of the time. So this is what I'm going to be running for sure. Then moving on to the bestials, this is a higher bestial count than what I'm used to seeing, because I have seen bestial counts are definitely a lot lower than this, mostly consisting of bestial Lubellion and just one Saronir. I like running my bestials because I find them to be useful all of the time, pretty much. So we have bestial Lubellion over here. So bestial Lubellion is going to be a very good searcher when it comes to your continuous spells. Not traps in this case. We're not running any kind of continuous branded traps anymore. We're just sticking with the spell. So that's Regained and Branded Lost. Now, this is a great searcher for that, but it's also a great searcher for your other bestial monsters too. And one of those is going to be bestial Magnuma, which I'm going to run 3 copies of. I find him to be very good for just being able to search another Lubellian, being able to search a Fallen Lubalbas if need be, or even more specifically to search out Bestial Saronir as well as another Bestial. I used to run Jerusalem in this build, but I had to take it out because I wanted to bring the card count down to 40, and I would say that Bestial Saronir was definitely the right pick because you could dump a Branded Speller Trap into the graveyard, of course, usually being a Speller Trap that you want to be able to recur, that you want to be able to get back. So this is really good to have around as well. Then we've got one Albion the Shrouded Dragon. This is a really good card for being able to recur some of those resources. Has a kind of a similar effect to Bestial Saronir, so I tend to use them pretty much interchangeably to get the same effect out of the two. So I would say that the Shrouded Dragon is a must-have here, and it also behaves as Fallen Lubalbas in the graveyard and on the field as well. So this is a must-have for sure. Then we have one Tri-Brigade Mercurier. The effect that comes up the most is just the effect to search when he gets banished. So I don't really get to use him as a hand trap all that often, but he does have a very good effect either way that could go in both directions. So I think that at least one Mercurier is a must, mostly for the searching effect though, because you could definitely search quite a few monsters in here. You could search for Quem, you could search for Cartesia, you could search for Albaz, you could search for Albion. So there are going to be quite a few targets here for sure. Next, we've got the only hand trap besides Mercurier that I run, and that is still going to be my triple effect Veiler over here. So now, well, this is probably when you would argue, why aren't you running Ghost Ogre instead with that in mind? And it's because you don't really get an inherent effect negation with Ghost Ogre the same way that you would with Effect Veiler. Effect Veiler behaves a lot like Infinite Impermanence, but this is an actual monster that I could use for fodder for fusion as well if I don't really need an effect negation right away. I could use it to fuse for Grangignol. I could use it to fuse for other things, such as any of the Despia monsters, for Perskinian, and for other monsters of the like. I could also use this to banish it as fodder for any of my Bestials over here too. I just feel like this has a lot more utility as a light than other hand traps would, even though Ash Blossom is still a fantastic alternative to run instead. Probably the one that I would recommend that you run instead, but just the fact that I can use Effect Veiler in more than one way because of that, to me means a lot more, so I prefer to run Effect Veiler. Next, we've got one Dark Magician here, and this is because we were running on Dragoon as well. I've been using Dragoon for quite a few months now, and this is just a package that I simply can't really let go of. So with that said, those have been all of the monsters that we are going to be running in this deck. And now we're going to move on to the spells and traps. First things first, I believe that this lineup hasn't actually changed all that much except for the removal of 2 cards, if anything. So we've got Triple Tactics Talents as our first set of spells. Triple Tactics Talents without any thrust in this deck due to deck space, mostly. But it is something that I would consider running in the future, actually, because thrust seems to be doing really well. But Talents as is already such a good card because I like it a lot more than anything such as Pot of Desires, because you don't have to waste any of your own resources from your deck and have to play the guessing game of whether or not you banish something that you're going to need. And Tactics is just going to allow you to draw. Most of the time you'll be able to activate the effect of either to steal an opponent's monster or to be able to draw 2 cards. I mostly tend to draw 2 cards, but sometimes stealing a monster is very good too. There's that third effect that I don't really pay too much attention to, but I would say that when it comes to this, Tactics as is just a really good card. It's a really good drawing spell as well. Can't really justify playing it at 3, but at 2 it does a really good job. Then you've got Nadir Servant, which is really there as a failsafe for when Branded Fusion fails, because this allows you to do some more searching of your own and to allow you to also get one of your own monsters into the graveyard if you need it, while still being able to search, which is pretty good. And because this just locks you out of the extra deck entirely after using it, there's not really too much to lose when you use this after trying to resolve Branded Fusion, but then that doesn't work. So Nadir Servant is still a very good card, but I no longer run Branded in High Spirits because I just find that that combo doesn't really appear to be that reliable too often. So I just feel like this is better without just expecting to have to rely on Branded in High Spirits. And you got double fusion deployment. I think that 2 is honestly just good enough. I know that literally everybody else plays 3, and I understand why, because you definitely have enough targets to justify 3, but I just think that 2 is really good enough, and I'm fairly satisfied with these ratios as is when it comes to fusion deployment, because ultimately what I really want is to be able to search for other cards that aren't specifically the fusion materials, because I already have other ways of searching for them. So I don't want to depend too much on fusion deployments, because I'm always gaining access to those other materials regardless. So that's why I only run 2. Then you've got double, or I should say triple, branded opening. As long as this card remains at 3, it is going to be ran at 3. The fusion protection does come up, but the searching is what you really want off of it. We have 5 targets for this card, which is great. And speaking of which, we are going to be running triple branded fusion over here as well. Now, this is going to be the bread and butter of the deck and the most important card of the deck, so you are always going to want to run this card at 3 as long as it remains at 3. It recently got limited in Master Duel, if I'm not mistaken, to 1, which is why people are afraid that this could get limited in the TCG. I don't think that that's going to happen, because I don't think that Branded is really that dominant right now. There are, I think, other decks to worry about, if anything, that still need some regulating. So I think that Konami has their hands tied over there regardless. But they did end up touching a Lightning Storm when I didn't think that they would, ever. But hey, I guess that they can also be very surprising, to put it nicely. Then we've got one Brandon in white. This is a great card for being able to recur some of your resources, and if you have a Fall on the Valbas in the graveyard already, you can use materials from your graveyard as well, which I think is really cool for being able to fuse. And then you've got one Brandon in red. Brandon in red is really useful for being able to make Guardian Chimera. It's one of the only ways of making Guardian Chimera in this deck, but it's not the only way, thankfully, because you would still be able to use cards like Branded in White, for example, if you really wanted to. Now, with that in mind, we also have Branded Regained, which is for being able to recycle our banished cards. So Lights or Darks, which is the only attributes that we're going to be running in this deck. And also, it'll allow you to summon some of your beast seals when your opponent does any kind of summoning of their own, which I think is really useful. So Regained is super cool. And you got one Branded Lost. Branded Lost is going to be Branded Lost. It's protection for fusions, and it's a constant searcher as well every time you fuse once per turn, of course. So there is that. And then you got Branded Retribution for being able to recur some of your own branded resources. Let's say that you have a branded fusion in your graveyard, you could just banish this from your graveyard to be able to recur that resource. So you could do that with any other branded spell or trap card, of course. And the effect to negate a summon also can come up, but it never has, because the cost is a little bit high, I would say, but it is something that is still there, and it is a counter trap as well, which is really cool. So it's spell speed 3. Now, with that said, that's everything for the main deck as is. So let's go ahead and move on to the extra deck, which we do have quite a bit to look at. Though, it should be said that not much has changed from last time. If anything, when it comes to the extra deck, it should be exactly the same as before. So let's go ahead and have a look. First, we've got Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. This card I hardly ever summon. I pretty much only summon into him if I have a Mirror Jade already, if I have other cards, other monsters that I would rather have on the field instead already, because we do not run the Gimmick Puppet lock or anything like that. I think that that lock is just super toxic, so I don't like to run it, but if you like to run it, that is entirely up to you. But this is one way that you would be able to enable that. But because I don't run that engine, this card isn't really as prominent in this deck, even though it is still pretty good, and it can't be super polyed away because it can't be used as a fusion material, so I like it. And sometimes this is the only thing that you can make, which is just really useful to have, because this is a 3000 attack beat stick. So I actually quite like Albion quite a bit. Then you got one Granguignol, the Dust Dragon. There's the argument for increasing the count of this card to 2, but I don't really see it, because personally, I think that at 1, he's just good enough. It's not like you're going to be recycling him all that much or anything, but oftentimes, unless it's like a very extreme grind game, it's not really going to demand that you run 2 of this. However, I could very well change my mind in the future about Granguignol. Then we have got double Mirror Jade. We are always going to be running on 2 Mirror Jades because this is a resource that you will be able to recur more often than not. You can get Mirror Jade in multiple ways, but being able to summon, or to guarantee yourself that you will be able to summon another Mirror Jade if you need it, is super useful. This is borderline the boss monster of this deck, hands down. This is probably what you will be going for when you're not going for Dragoon, and vice versa. Now you've got one Alba Lunetis, which is just pretty much at this point a target for being able to dump to the graveyard and then being able to get some searching with it. And you've got one Red Eye Stark Dragoon. Red Eye Stark Dragoon is still a very powerful card against very much any deck that you pit it up against. So I really like it, and I'm going to keep running this engine for as long as I can. Super easy to make as well. Then you got one Guardian Chimera. So Guardian Chimera over here is still a very powerful card. Because we don't run Polymerization, you don't get the protection effect from it being in the graveyard. Not that it matters, because you want Guardian Chimera probably for its attack, sure, but you also are going to want this monster for its effect, which is to be able to draw and then be able to pop some of your opponent's cards. So I actually quite like it as is regardless. Then we got one Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. I think that only one is really necessary, and I think that the community in general pretty much agrees on that at this point. Lubellion at 1 is just good enough as is, because you don't really care that much if he ends up getting banished through Kashira or anything like that. Either way, Kashira is going to want to take Dragoon away from you, so I don't think that it really matters all that much if you're just running one Lubellion. I know that that was a prominent fear that was out there in the community, but it's not really necessary. You've got double Albion. I believe that this is fairly standard as it is, so I won't go too much into that. Then we have actually got some targets that can be considered targets for super polymerization depending on the matchup. So you've got one Despian Quartus, but this is also a target for Grand Guignol, if anything, which is why I like to run this. But with Grand Guignol, I mostly like to run Despian Praskinian. So no more Masquerade package, unfortunately, because it just isn't as feasible anymore, as much as I loved my Masquerade package. So yeah, I think that Praskinian and Quartus probably make a better combination in this case, because they actually have Despian names on them, versus Masquerade that does not. Then for the synchros, we have one Despian Luluba Lilith. I think that Luluba Lilith as a target for dumping into the graveyard for being able to recur some of your other resources is pretty good. But if you do get the chance to summon her, then strongly recommend that you take advantage of her effect, because she can definitely become a very powerful resource. And you've got Chaos Angel. Chaos Angel protects himself. He is a lone wolf, for sure. And his attack stat is so great at 3,500 that it's just very difficult to justify a game without him. He's very easy to make as well, since he's a level 10. And you don't even need to have an actual tuner around, as long as you have a light or dark that you can use as a monster for synchro summoning him. So again, you do not need any tuners. He's super easy to make, and if you use a light and dark to make him, then you get both of his effects, all of his effects, which is particularly impressive. He is still a high value card for a reason. Now we've got Despia Disbatter, which I hardly ever summon, because if I have the opportunity to summon a level 10, I will go for Chaos Angel naturally, but Disbatter is also really good in case you need it. And he's also a dragon, so there's also some utility with that, if need be. And his attack stat is just as high as Chaos Angel's as well, since we're looking at 3,500 here too. This is a massive, massive, massive card. So then we've got the Aluber OCG token, and that's going to be pretty much it when it comes to the extra deck. Not too much to say here, because it is virtually the same as it was before. No changes to speak of whatsoever. But now we can get into the side deck itself. And when it comes to the side deck, we made a very minor change-ish, but still one that has made a difference, just to match things as they are going around in the format. We're still running on triple Kurikara, because Kurikara is still a very powerful card, and I think that a lot of people are realizing this now. I actually bought my Starlights before Kurikara was something that people were chasing after, thankfully, because I just realized, oh, this seems like a more effective Nibiru, if anything, against Kashira, but it looks like a lot of people are now starting to see the value of it. as of lately, if anything. So I do feel bad for those people that are having to pay those crazy high prices for Kurikara, even just the secrets. But regardless, this is still such a good card in a lot of different matchups, and I find myself being able to use her in a lot of different matchups. So I enjoy Kurikara a lot. Then you've got triple super polymerization as well, because this is going to be especially good in the mirror match, so this is mostly to address that. But if you're facing up against a lighter dark deck, you could still take advantage of this very well, because you would still be able to use their monsters to help you fuse into other ones of your own. So super polymerization is great. Even if I don't run Dracocepalia or anything like that, I think that this will do totally fine. Then you've got triple Nibiru. So speaking of a more effective Nibiru, Kurikara isn't always the best option over Nibiru. Sometimes Nibiru is just what you're going to want instead, because let's say that you're going up against heroes or anything like that, you're probably not going to be able to use Kurikara to her fullest or all that effectively, and Nibiru will just be the better option. Nibiru will absolutely put a hard stop on them, as well as when it comes to other decks. So Nibiru, I think, is just a better option depending on the matchup. It really just strongly depends on the matchup. Then you've got triple Droll and Lockbird. This used to be Lightning Storm, but Lightning Storm got limited to 2, and I do not like the asymmetry. So I went into Droll and Lockbird, because Droll can stop actually quite a few decks, and right now Droll is a very powerful hand trap for sure. It's unfortunate that it is a wind instead of a lighter dark, but we do still have a very powerful hand trap that can put a hard stop on your opponent for one turn, depending on the matchup, of course. But still, even though it is very much matchup dependent, it has been a very useful card for sure. And then we've got triple Infinite Impermanence as well, because sometimes Effect Failure doesn't offer enough negates. I do come across some matchups where that is unfortunately the case, but this is one of those cases where Infinite Impermanence would just come into utility, because I would be able to add even more negates, maybe even negate twice per turn with Imperm and the Effect Failure and that kind of thing. So it's that kind of crazy playstyle that entices me to want to run this as is. But with that said, this has been pretty much the end of my deck profile, so thank you so much for watching all the way up until the very end, and I hope that you did in fact learn something from watching this deck profile. And if you do have any suggestions for other cards that I should be running instead, please make sure to let me know, as I'm always open to suggestions and to your comments. So please, by all means, if you think that I should be doing other things, or if you think that I should be running even more than 40 cards to make room for other cards as well, then I absolutely don't mind that, because I was running on a 45 card build before until I dropped it back down and that kind of thing. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe for more content like this. And if you would like to see a test hand video, please make sure to let me know in the comments too, because if you want to see it, then I will try to deliver on that. Now with that said, this has been Francisco Ferreira Vlogs. Thank you for watching, and until next time, enjoy.